M. Night Shyamalan has had a turbulent career. When he arrived on the filmmaking scene as a director, the press was quick to acclaim him, going so far as to call him the next Steven Spielberg. And honestly, there was something to it. The same comparison has been made for other directors, after all, and there's almost always a hint of truth. Why is that? It's because Spielberg was just 29 when Jaws was released, and made nearly $500 million at the box office on a budget of $9 million. Shyamalan had achieved something similar with The Sixth Sense. Also released when he was just 29, the movie did $672 million on a budget of $40 million, and earned him Academy Award nominations for Best Picture, Best Director, and Best Original Screenplay. It's honestly understandable why people made the comparison. Of course, his career did not pan out anything like Steven Spielberg's. What was right, went wrong, and then went right again. Shyamalan's career can be broken up into three eras. I'll call the first the golden years. This is the period between 1999 and 2004, when he released some of his most critically acclaimed and financially successful movies. The budgets weren't massive, but the returns were. I'll call the second the fall. This period runs from 2006 until 2013. The reviews started getting worse, and returns on investment started going down before culminating in two well-known flops. The third I'll call the comeback. These are the years from 2015 until now. Each movie since then has been a self-funded commercial success, while critically they're all over the place. The golden years are the shortest period, running from 1999 until 2004. In these years, Shyamalan released 4 films: 1999's The Sixth Sense, 2000's Unbreakable, 2002's Signs, and 2004's The Village. These films introduced the motif that Shyamalan is arguably the most famous for, the use of twist endings. Each of these films was a commercial success and, except for The Village, they were critical successes as well. The Sixth Sense deserves particular note considering how young he was when he directed it and the awards nominations that it got. Nothing he did could have prepared him for the roller coaster he was about to get on. After its unexpected success, Newsweek hailed him as the next Spielberg. Unbreakable was Shyamalan's second big film. It made $248 million on a budget of $75 million. It was a successful follow-up to another successful film and only increased the comparisons to Spielberg, whose movie after Jaws was Close Encounters of the Third Kind, which made $306 million on a budget of $9 million. The keen-eyed among you will notice that despite the comparison to Spielberg, Shyamalan wasn't Spielberg. This would become more evident during his indie turn in 2015, but looking at The Sixth Sense and Unbreakable, it's obvious that the comparison really ended with The Sixth Sense. Close Encounters was far cheaper to make than Unbreakable, even after adjusted for inflation, and made more money than it. While successful, Unbreakable was disappointing when compared against The Sixth Sense. It did well, and studios were happy to give him another chance, but the press had hyped him up to become something he was not. The Sixth Sense was a successful film, but Jaws was a sensation. It, along with Star Wars, just 2 years later, changed the business model in Hollywood. M. Night Shyamalan's biggest problem, then, wasn't that he was a bad filmmaker. It's that he was being compared to a historic filmmaker. His next movie, Signs, performed better than Unbreakable, making $408 million against a $72 million budget. The twist ending is a bit reminiscent of the fate of the aliens from H.G. Wells' The War of the Worlds, but most people didn't make that connection. Some thought it was just dumb. Still, the movie got good reviews. But this was his third movie with a twist ending, and this is when his reputation as the guy who makes movies with twist endings started getting set in stone. Even now, more than 20 years after its release, most people probably associate Shyamalan with twists. In 2004, he released another thriller, The Village. The film was a financial success, grossing $257 million on a budget of $60 million. But this marked an important turning point for Shyamalan critically. This is when things started going downhill. The Village featured, what else, another twist that disappointed critics. Roger Ebert wrote a scathing 1-star review and said that the twist is, quote, so witless, in fact, that when we do discover the secret, we want to rewind the film so we don't know the secret anymore, end quote. Between 2003 and 2004, he was involved in some odd cases. Some authors began to level charges of plagiarism against him for The Sixth Sense, Signs, and The Village, though, insofar as I can tell, none of the charges actually resulted in a lawsuit. More perplexing was a 2004 incident in which the Sci-Fi Channel claimed in a documentary about Shyamalan, filmed while he was working on The Village, that, as a child, he had a drowning incident which led to him being dead for 30 minutes, and that upon resuscitation, he was able to communicate with spirits. That is to say, he could see dead people.
I see dead people.
None of this actually happened. It was an elaborate hoax meant to help market The Village. The false story was fed to press who, understandably, were not happy at being taken for a ride. Unfortunately, the only dead thing in sight was about to be his career for nearly a decade. Things were going decently for Shyamalan up through The Village. Sure, the reviews weren't as great as his previous films, and he was associated with gimmick twist endings, but his films were financially successful. But beginning with Lady in the Water, that was going to change. Before covering that, I want to make a quick note about the previous 4 films, their budgets. Up until this point and later on, Shyamalan proved that if the budget was reasonable, his films could be a success. If you actually look at his film budgets and returns, only 3, maybe 4 films failed to make a profit. Out of 14 films over a 25-year period, I'd say that's actually a really good track record. Sure, he loves his twists, but liking a gimmick does not make you a bad director. Making bad, poorly performing movies does. He has those, like every director except, apparently, James Cameron. But, on the whole, I think Shyamalan is an above-average director who is more maligned than he should have been. Now, that being said, this section is called The Fall because this is where most of his movies were either critical or commercial duds. He only really has 2 out-and-out failures, and both of them are his most expensive movies: The Last Airbender and After Earth. We'll get to them in a moment. First, Lady in the Water. The movie was a critical and commercial flop, and one of his first true failures. As with his previous films, he cast himself in a small part in this film as well. His role was someone who is meant for great things, but will, at his height, be cut down by an assassin. A rather arrogant casting, and many said the same thing. Of course, it still had its admirers. Cahiers du Cinéma, the venerable French film magazine, hailed it as one of the best films of 2006, and called it, quote, his funnest and most entertaining film, end quote. Lady in the Water sent his stock into freefall, and is when more cracks began to form. Shyamalan had a difficult time selling his next film, The Happening, though it eventually got made. It fared better commercially, but even worse critically. At the time, and since then, many people have started to think about it as a B-movie and reassessed it in a much more positive light. In an interview, Shyamalan even said as much, quote, we're making an excellent B-movie, that's our goal, end quote. Mark Wahlberg, who stars in it, was not happy with the end product though, and called it, quote, a really bad movie, end quote. Depending on who you ask, it's either really enjoyable or one of the worst movies ever made, and there's not much in between. Still, as an R-rated movie, it made $163 million on a budget that was between $48 and $60 million. It helped him land a $150 million budget for his next movie, 2010's disastrous The Last Airbender. The Last Airbender was based on Avatar, The Last Airbender. Now, you might have noticed that they dropped the Avatar part. Well, that was because just a year prior, James Cameron released Avatar, and they didn't want people to confuse the 2 films. Whatever Shyamalan's version was, it was certainly not beloved. It was criticized for literally everything: screenplay, casting, acting, directing, effects, 3D, and more. About the only thing that got praise was the musical score. It was supposed to be a trilogy, but those plans were quickly scrapped. It made $320 million on its $150 million budget, meaning it maybe turned a profit. It's a movie where, seemingly, everything went wrong. Roger Ebert was, again, scathing, saying, The Last Airbender is an agonizing experience in every category I can think of, and others still waiting to be invented. Though he tried to defend his work on it immediately following release, in 2019, Shyamalan admitted, quote, I did these movies and, rightfully, got crushed. Because they, rightfully said, you don't believe in yourself, you don't believe in your own voice, and you don't believe in your values, end quote. There's really nothing more to say about it. It's a bad film, disavowed by the people that worked on it, and it hasn't been reappraised. 2013's After Earth, starring Will Smith and Jaden Smith, suffered a similar fate. The critical reviews were bad, and it made just $244 million on a budget of $130 million, meaning it failed to earn its money back. Shyamalan was cursed when it came to movies with budgets higher than $100 million. Smith had wanted to work with him prior, but it hadn't panned out. Now it was his chance. Unlike his prior movies, Shyamalan's name was mostly left off the extensive marketing campaign, which focused on the Smiths. But the money was seemingly wasted. The film was unloved by critics and moviegoers. Again, people called it one of the worst movies ever made, making that 3 in a row for Shyamalan. The movie was supposed to be a franchise, but those plans were quickly scrapped. Now, what had gone wrong? I think the issue is that Shyamalan had moved on from his roots. He went from doing low-budget films to higher-budget films. That meant that he had less room for maneuvering. Now, he had other people to answer to. He couldn't get a little weird with the films. That would change with his next movie, The Visit. It was a return to form for Shyamalan. Original, low-budget, and with a twist. After The Last Airbender and After Earth, Shyamalan could not get financing. No one would give him any money. But the man is a filmmaker through and through. He decided to fund 2015's The Visit out of pocket, borrowing $5 million against his home. Whatever you think about him, it takes courage to literally risk your home for your movie. He thought that he was done for after several studios passed on a few cuts of the film. Eventually, he found the right tone and found a distributor in Universal and a producer in Jason Blum. Shyamalan did not lose his home. The film was a success, grossing nearly $100 million on the $5 million budget. Just as well, the critical reviews were decent. Scott Mendelson, writing for Forbes, was effusive in his praise, saying, quote, "The Visit is the one we've been waiting for, folks. It's good. Oh my word, is it good." But, more importantly, it is excellent in that specific way that reminds us why M. Night Shyamalan was once such a marvel, end quote. Shyamalan was, once again, becoming himself instead of what he thought people wanted him to be. The Visit is the movie that started the comeback. Between 2015 and 2023, Shyamalan has made 5 movies, each of which was a commercial success and had mixed to positive reviews. 2016's Split was an even bigger success than The Visit. Made on a budget of $9 million that Shyamalan once again fronted out of pocket, the film made $279 million at the box office and earned positive reviews. Set in the same universe as Unbreakable, 16 years prior, the marketing elided that fact. People found out through the twist. On a personal level for Shyamalan, it became his first movie to top the box office for 3 weeks in a row since 1999's The Sixth Sense. 2019's Glass cost $20 million and made $247 million. Again, funded out of pocket. Again, a massive success. Though the reviews were more mixed. Though upset with the reviews, Shyamalan was happy with the end product and, for the most part, the audience was pleased as well. His next 2 films, 2021's Old and 2023's Knock at the Cabin, do pose a bit more trouble. Old made $90 million on a budget of $18 million, and Knock at the Cabin made $54 million on a budget of $20 million. Both steep declines from the prior 3 films. It's unlikely that either lost money, but they probably provided some food for thought for Shyamalan. Is history about to repeat itself, or are they just blips? I think it's the latter. See, most recently he's moved into TV, showrunning and directing some episodes of Servant for Apple TV Plus, which finished its 4-season run in March 2023. Each season has been better reviewed than the previous one, showing that Shyamalan's still got it. The last 5 films have, I think, put Shyamalan on the right track once again. He put up a combined $72 million of his own money for a return of $768 million at the box office, more than 10 times. He does what any film lover with the resources would like to do. Make the movie they want, take on the risk, and reap the entire reward. What had gone wrong with Shyamalan? I think the issue is that Shyamalan had moved on from his roots. As I said before, the twist ending isn't a problem. Directors have their quirks. Michael Bay loves his explosive, bombastic films. J.J. Abrams loves his lens flares. Zack Snyder loves his slow-mo. James Cameron loves his big budgets. Christopher Nolan loves his practical effects. And in that line, M. Night Shyamalan loves his twists. They're affects that help imprint a director's vision on a film and should, I think, be encouraged instead of discouraged. Shyamalan made interesting, low-budget and mid-budget indie-esque films that he put his own stamp on. They were interesting because he got a little weird with them. He tried to make a move into big budget filmmaking, but that wasn't who he was, which is fine. He had some dark in-between years, but since 2015, he's been on the right track. His next film is Trap, which should be released in 2024. I'm never one to hope that someone fails. I hope that the movie is good and that he continues his successful streak. He's not the next Steven Spielberg, no one is. He's the one and only M. Night Shyamalan, and I think that's enough. Shyamalan has proved that movies don't need massive budgets to be successful. Small budgets can mean huge returns in the right hands. His success since 2015 proves that he's got the right hands.